Next. I stepped forward to the counter, handing the clerk my completed application and my driver's license. He was a young guy, maybe early 20s, with tired eyes and a bored expression. "First time applying, Mr. Cross?" he asked, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Yeah, finally taking the plunge," I replied, leaning against the counter. "Big trip planned." I tapped my fingers on the counter, tap, 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 a nervous habit I didn't even realize I had. He glanced at my license, then back at the screen. His brow furrowed slightly. He typed something else, his fingers moving a little faster now. He said, a non-committal sound that sent a tiny prickle of unease down my spine. He clicked a few more buttons, his eyes glued to the monitor. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the counter. Finally, he looked up, his expression shifting from bored to puzzled. "I'm not finding anything, Mr. Cross." "What do you mean?" I asked, my smile faltering. "What's not finding?" "Your information, it's not coming up." He tapped the screen. "No record found." I chuckled, a nervous sound. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Maybe a typo?" He shook his head. "I entered it exactly as it appears on your license, and I double-checked the social security number." He pointed to the fields on his screen. "See, nothing." My unease grew. This wasn't a simple typo. This was something else. "Look, can you try again? Maybe check the birth certificate database? I was born in this city, General Hospital, June 12th, 1991. Ethan James Cross." He sighed, the sigh of someone who dealt with frustrated customers all day long. But he complied. He navigated through various screens, his fingers clicking and tapping. The minutes ticked by, each one amplifying my growing anxiety. "Nothing," he repeated, shaking his head. "No birth certificate, no social security number registration. It's like you don't exist." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. That's ridiculous. Of course I exist. I'm standing right here." He looked at me, a mixture of pity and suspicion in his eyes. "Sir, I understand this is frustrating, but I can only go by what the system tells me. And the system says there's no record of you." He called over a supervisor, a woman with a stern face and a tightly pinned bun. She repeated the process, checking and rechecking my information, her expression growing increasingly grim. "Mr. Cross," she said finally, her voice polite but firm. "Are you sure you've provided the correct information?" "Of course I'm sure," I exclaimed, my voice rising slightly. "I've lived here my whole life. I have a driver's license, a bank account, a job. I'm a citizen. Our system shows no record of an Ethan Cross with your details," she repeated, her tone unwavering. "No birth certificate, no social security number, no tax records. Nothing. It's as if you appeared out of thin air." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic rhythm against the sterile silence of the office. This wasn't a mistake. This was something bigger, something terrifying. "That's impossible," I insisted, my voice shaking slightly. "There must be a mistake, a glitch in the system, a clerical error." The supervisor looked at me, her expression softening slightly, but her eyes remained firm. "Mr. Cross, I understand this is upsetting, but I assure you, our system is very thorough. I'm going to have to ask you to step into that room." She pointed to a small, windowless office down the hall, "while we investigate this further." I hesitated, a wave of fear washing over me. The room looked sterile, cold, and isolating, but I had no choice. I nodded, my throat tight. "Just wait here, Mr. Cross," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Someone will be with you shortly." She closed the door, leaving me alone in the small, suffocating room. The fluorescent lights hummed, a relentless, irritating sound. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. It was impossible. It was insane. I existed. I had to exist. But the evidence, or rather, the lack of it, was staring me in the face. A growing, terrifying feeling was taking root in my gut. This was not a simple mistake. This was something much, much worse. I stumbled out of the passport office, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding me. The bustling city sounds, car horns, chattering voices, the rumble of buses seemed distant, muffled. My head was spinning. No record. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling refrain. My first instinct was to call my bank. Maybe there was a connection, some kind of system-wide error. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly. I dialed the customer service number, the familiar automated menu greeting me. I punched in my account number, the one I'd memorized years ago. "We're sorry," a robotic voice announced, "but we are unable to locate an account matching that number. Please check the number and try again." I tried again, carefully entering each digit. Same result. Frozen. My account was frozen, or worse, it didn't exist. Panic started to claw at my throat. I needed proof. I needed something, anything to show that I was real, that I existed. I hailed a cab, my mind racing, and gave the driver my apartment address. My apartment. My sanctuary. It had to be there. Birth certificate, old tax returns, something. I rummaged through drawers, tossed papers onto the floor, a growing sense of desperation fueling my frantic search. Nothing. It was as if a meticulous cleaner had swept through, removing any trace of Ethan Cross. I grabbed my laptop, my fingers flying over the keyboard. My online banking, my email, my social media accounts. Surely those couldn't be gone. One by one, the websites loaded, each delivering the same devastating blow. My bank account, invalid login credentials. My email, account not found. My social media profiles, blank pages, as if I'd never existed. I was a digital ghost, wiped clean from the virtual world. I slammed the laptop shut, the sudden noise echoing in the silent apartment. It was like I had been erased, systematically, completely erased. I had to see someone, talk to someone in person. I rushed out of the apartment, heading to the nearest branch of my bank. The teller, a young woman with a bright smile, greeted me politely. But her smile faded as I explained my situation, as she typed in my information, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, shaking her head. "There's no record of an account with that name or social security number." "But I've been banking with you for years!" I exclaimed, my voice cracking. "I have statements, checks. I can prove it." She called the manager, a middle-aged man with a weary expression. He listened patiently to my increasingly frantic explanation, then disappeared into his office for a few minutes. He returned, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cross," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "There's nothing I can do. We have no record of you. At all. Work? I had to go to work. My boss, colleagues, they would know me." I rushed to the office building, my heart pounding. I approached to the building entrance and swiped my access card, hoping it will work. The light flashed red. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. A security guard, a burly man I'd seen countless times, approached me, his expression wary. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "I work here," I said, my voice desperate. "Ethan Cross, marketing department. My keycard isn't working." He frowned. "I don't recognize you, sir, and I know everyone who works here." I ran to the elevator and pressed the button. The elevator didn't arrive. I was starting to understand why. My boss, Mark, walked by. "Mark!" I called out. He turned, looked, and me, and for a quick second I felt hope. He smiled and approached. "Hey, are you here for an interview? I think HR is on the third floor." My hope vanished. Just yesterday, we had been joking around the coffee machine, discussing the upcoming marketing campaign. He had clapped me on the back, praising my work on the latest project. "You're a valuable asset to this team, Ethan," he'd said. Now he looked at me like I was a stranger. Panic seized me, a cold, suffocating wave. I was disappearing, not just from records, but from people's memories, from reality itself. My phone. I still had my phone. I dialed my parents' number, the number I'd known by heart since childhood. "We're sorry," a recorded voice announced. "The number you have dialed is not in service." I tried my mom's cell. Same result. My dad's cell. Disconnected. I stood there, in the middle of the busy street, the phone clutched in my hand, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't a glitch, it was deliberate. Someone somehow had erased me, erased my entire existence. I was a ghost, adrift in a world that no longer recognized me, and I had no idea why. My feet carried me on autopilot, a desperate, last-ditch effort to find something, anything, solid to hold on to. My childhood home? My parents? Surely they wouldn't have forgotten me. Surely there, in the place where I'd grown up, I would find some semblance of reality, some anchor in this swirling vortex of non-existence. The familiar streets of my old neighborhood blurred past, each corner, each tree, each house triggering a flood of memories. Memories that felt increasingly fragile, increasingly unreal. I reached 12 Oak Street, my heart pounding in my chest. The house stood there, just as I remembered it. The same faded yellow paint, the same slightly crooked porch swing, the same overgrown rose bushes flanking the front steps. It was my house, I knew it. But something felt off. A subtle wrongness that I couldn't quite place. The curtains were different, perhaps. The garden looked neater, more manicured than I remembered. My mother had always had a wild, untamed garden. I walked up the familiar path, my legs feeling strangely heavy. I reached the front door and pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing through the house, a sound I'd heard countless times before. The door opened, and a woman I'd never seen before stood there, looking at me with polite confusion. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a warm smile, but she was a complete stranger. "Yes?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I'm looking for the Cross family," I said, my voice sounding strained and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "They've lived here for—" I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "Forever? All my life?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry. You must have the wrong address," she said gently. "We've lived here for 15 years. There's no Cross family here." 15 years? 15 years? That was impossible. I had lived here until I left for college, only 12 years ago. "But this is 12 Oak Street, right?" I asked, a desperate edge creeping into my voice. "I grew up here. This is my house." "Yes, this is 12 Oak Street," she confirmed, her expression softening with sympathy. "But you're mistaken. Perhaps you should check with the city records. Sometimes addresses get mixed up." City records. The same records that claimed I didn't exist. I felt a wave of dizziness, of disorientation. The world seemed to be tilting, the familiar landscape shifting and blurring around me. I have a picture," I stammered, fumbling in my wallet. I pulled out the worn photograph, the one I always carried with me, my parents, younger and smiling, standing in front of this very house, their arms around me, a much younger version of myself. I held it out to her, my hand trembling. "These are my parents. This is us, right here. Do you recognize them?" She took the photo, her eyes scanning it carefully. She looked at me, then back at the photo, a flicker of pity in her gaze. "I'm sorry," she said softly, shaking her head. I don't recognize them. I've never seen them before. I took the photo back, my fingers clutching it like a lifeline. It was the only tangible proof I had left of my past, of my family, of my very existence. I thanked her, a mumbled, automatic response, and turned away, stumbling back down the path. The house, my house, stood there, silent and indifferent, a monument to a life that apparently never existed. I walked, aimlessly, my mind reeling. Was I going crazy? Was this all some elaborate hallucination? Were my memories false, implanted, fabricated? The questions swirled in my head, a chaotic storm of doubt and fear. I found myself in a small park, a familiar haven from my childhood. I sat down on a park bench, the same bench where I used to sit with my dad, feeding the ducks, listening to his stories. I stared at the photo in my hand, tracing the outlines of my parents' faces, clinging to the details. My mother's warm smile, my father's kind eyes, the way they held me, close and safe. These were real memories. They had to be. Tap, tap, tap. My fingers drummed against the wooden bench, a subconscious rhythm, a desperate attempt to ground myself, to find some anchor in this shifting reality. I closed my eyes, trying to remember everything. My first day of school, my 10th birthday party, Christmas mornings, family vacations. The small, everyday moments that made up a life, my life. But the memories felt distant, fragile, like faded photographs threatening to disintegrate at the slightest touch. I was a ghost, adrift in a world that no longer recognized me, clinging to the remnants of a life that might never have been. And the terrifying question loomed. If my memories weren't real, then who was I? A sliver of hope, irrational but persistent, clung to me as I approached my apartment building. Maybe it was all a bad dream, a bizarre hallucination. Maybe I'd wake up in my own bed and everything would be back to normal. My bank account would be there. My job would be there. My parents. I reached my floor, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. My apartment door. 3B. It was slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I hadn't left it open. I always locked it. Cautiously, I pushed the door open, my senses on high alert. The air inside was still, heavy with a sense of wrongness. The apartment had been tossed, but not in the way a burglar would. It wasn't a chaotic mess of overturned furniture and scattered belongings. It was systematic. Drawers pulled open, their contents neatly examined and left in orderly piles. Cushions removed from the sofa, but placed carefully on the floor. Books pulled from the shelves, but stacked neatly on the coffee table. It was a search, a thorough, professional search, and it sent a chill down my spine. A creak from the bedroom. I froze. I wasn't alone. My mind raced. Call the police? No. They wouldn't believe me. They couldn't believe me. I didn't exist. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find. A cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, and crept towards the bedroom, my heart pounding in my ears. Two men in dark suits were standing in the middle of the room. They were both tall and imposing, with impassive faces and cold, calculating eyes. They looked like they'd stepped out of a movie, but this was no movie. This was real. "Ethan Cross?" one of the men said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to sound brave. "What do you want?" The other man stepped forward. "We have some questions for you." "I don't know anything," I insisted, gripping the skillet tighter. "I don't know why any of this is happening. The first man cut me off. "You don't exist, Mr. Cross, and that's a problem." His words hit me like a physical blow. You don't exist. The same phrase, repeated again and again, a mantra of my new reality. They moved with surprising speed, flanking me, cutting off my escape route. I was trapped. "What do you want from me?" I repeated, my voice desperate now. "Cooperation," the second man said. "Come with us quietly, and this will be much easier." Easier? Easier for whom? I knew instinctively that going with them would be the end. I might not exist on paper, but I was still alive, still breathing, and I wasn't going to disappear without a fight. I lunged forward, swinging the skillet with all my might. It connected with the first man's head with a sickening thud. He staggered, momentarily stunned. But the other man was too fast. He grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with brutal efficiency. I cried out in pain, dropping the skillet. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. I managed to break free for a split second, enough to land a solid punch to the second man's jaw. He grunted, but barely flinched. He grabbed me again, this time with a grip like iron. The first man, recovered now, pulled out a syringe, filled with a clear liquid. "No!" I screamed, struggling with every ounce of strength I had left. Just as the needle was about to pierce my skin, I twisted my body, using my momentum to throw the man off balance. I scrambled towards the window, my only escape route. I knew the layout of my building, the fire escape, the alleyway below. I smashed the window with a chair, the sound of shattering glass echoing in the small apartment. I climbed out onto the fire escape, ignoring the shards of glass digging into my hands. I didn't look back. I just ran, down the fire escape, across the alleyway, into the crowded streets. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I was sure I'd lost them. I was a fugitive, a ghost, hunted by men who claimed I didn't exist. Agent Solomon Reed sat in the back of a black SUV, the city lights blurring past the window. His phone buzzed. He answered it, his expression hardening as he listened to the report. "He escaped?" Reed said, his voice tight. "How?" He listened to the details, his frustration growing. A civilian, a non-entity, had managed to evade two of his best agents. It was unacceptable. He hung up the phone, his gaze settling on a file on the seat beside him. It was Ethan Cross's file, or rather, the lack of one. A single, blurry photograph was the only thing it contained. A young man, ordinary-looking, with a slightly defiant expression. Reed stared at the photo, a strange feeling stirring within him, a flicker of something. Recognition? He dismissed it immediately. It was impossible. He had never met Ethan Cross. He didn't exist. Yet the feeling lingered, a nagging sense of unease, a whisper of doubt. He picked up his pocket watch, a habit, and turned it over and over in his hands. His thumb rubbed the smooth, worn surface. He flipped it open, although he never did look at the time. Then he snapped it shut. Something was off. Something about this case, about this man who shouldn't exist, was deeply, fundamentally wrong. And Solomon Reed, despite his orders, was starting to want to know why. The city, once my familiar playground, now felt alien and hostile. Every face, every camera, every passing police car was a potential threat. I was a ghost, adrift in a world that had no record of me, and hunted by shadows. I needed help, but who could I trust? Who would even believe me? I had to disappear, to become even more of a ghost than I already was. I needed to go off the grid. My old life, the one with the comfortable apartment and the steady job, was gone. But I wasn't completely helpless. I had skills, buried deep remnants of a past I was now desperately clinging to. In college, I'd dabbled in less than legal activities. Nothing major, just some minor hacking, some exploration of the digital underworld. It had been a thrill, a challenge, a way to test my limits. I'd never thought I'd need those skills again. I remembered the old tricks, how to blend in, how to become invisible in a crowd, how to find cash-only jobs, how to use public Wi-Fi without leaving a trace. how to live on the margins. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash, using a fake name I'd pulled out of thin air. The room was dingy and depressing, but it was a sanctuary, a place to think, to plan. I needed money. I couldn't use my bank cards, my credit cards. They were useless. I remembered an old contact, a guy named Fingers, who used to fence stolen goods. Finding him again would be risky, but I had no choice. After hours spent scouring dive bars and back alleys, relying on half-forgotten connections and whispered rumors, I finally tracked him down. He didn't recognize me, of course, but he recognized the desperation in my eyes. I sold my watch, a gift from my father, another memory that felt increasingly fragile, for a fraction of its value. It was enough to get by, for now. The feeling of being watched was constant, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Every shadow, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me jump. Paranoia, I knew, but a justified paranoia. They were looking for me. I had to be smarter, faster, more elusive. My next priority was communication. I couldn't use my own phone. It was a tracking device. I needed a burner, something untraceable. I found a small, shady electronics store in a forgotten corner of the city, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. I paid cash for a cheap prepaid phone, no ID required. Standing on a street corner, holding the burner phone in my hand, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I was alone, adrift, hunted, but I was still alive. And I wasn't giving up. The cybercafe was hidden in the basement of a dilapidated building, down a narrow alleyway reeking of stale garbage and desperation. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of outdated computers. This was the kind of place where anonymity was the currency, where questions were rarely asked, and where shadows moved freely in the digital world. It was a place I remembered from my college days, a place I'd hoped never to see again, but desperate times. I found an empty terminal in a dark corner, the flickering screen casting an eerie glow on the grimy walls. I paid for an hour of access, cash only, and slipped into the worn-out chair. I needed help. I needed someone who could navigate the digital labyrinth, someone who could find the answers I couldn't. I needed a hacker, a damn good one. I logged on, using a generic username and password, my fingers flying over the keyboard, muscle memory kicking in. I navigated to the deep web, to the hidden forums where the digital underworld thrived. I crafted a message carefully coded, a beacon in the darkness. Ghost in the machine, erased. Need help tracing origin, no records exist. Project Chimera, Langley. It was a long shot, a desperate plea thrown into the void. But it was all I had. I posted the message and waited, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Every face, every shadow, seemed to hold a potential threat. Then, a response. A single line of encrypted text. Intriguing. Meet me. The usual place? Midnight. The usual place was a code, a reference to an old online game we used to play, a virtual meeting spot. It meant the responder knew the old ways, the old codes. It meant they were likely legitimate. I glanced around to make sure that no one was behind me. Then, I took another look at the reply. Intriguing. Meet me. The usual place. Midnight. L, the initial of the sender. Lena's perspective. The message blinked on my screen, a cryptic anomaly in the usual flow of data. Ghost in the machine, erased. Need help tracing origin. No records exist. Project Chimera. Langley. Well, 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 I murmured to my computer. A custom-built beast I'd affectionately named Behemoth. What have we here? I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping a rapid rhythm on the armrest. My apartment was a chaotic symphony of technology. Wires snaked across the floor, circuit boards lay scattered on every surface, and the glow of multiple monitors illuminated the room. Energy drink cans, empty and half full, littered my desk. I hadn't slept in... well, I'd lost track. Sleep was for the weak. I thrived in this chaos. It was my sanctuary, my domain. And I was one of the best. A ghost in the machine myself, a digital phantom who could slip through firewalls, crack encryptions, and uncover secrets that were meant to stay buried. But I had my own secrets, my own reasons for staying hidden. This message. It was different. It was a challenge, a mystery. And it mentioned Project Chimera, a name that sent a shiver down my spine, a name I thought I'd buried long ago. I ran a quick trace on the message's origin. Untraceable. Good. This ghost knew what they were doing. I typed a response, encrypting it with a cipher I hadn't used in years. Intriguing. Meet me. The usual place. Midnight. L. I sent the message and leaned back, a slow smile spreading across my face. This could be interesting. Very interesting. And dangerous. Dangerously interesting. My fingers itched for a challenge. My vintage keyboard, a relic from a bygone era, was calling to me. Time to play, and I really wanted to help. It's been a while. I glanced at the clock on my main monitor. 11:45 p.m. Time to go meet a ghost. I grabbed my worn-out leather jacket, a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was going to be fun. But as I was leaving, doubt crossed my mind. Was I being set up? Ethan's perspective. The public library was Lena's choice. Crowded, noisy, plenty of exits, and free Wi-Fi if we need it, she'd texted. It made sense. Maximum anonymity, minimum risk of, well, whatever those men in suits had planned for me. I arrived early, nerves jangling. I scanned the faces around me, searching for... I didn't even know. Someone who looked like a hacker? Was there a look? I felt ridiculous. I chose a table near the back, strategically positioned with a clear view of the entrance and a quick escape route to a side door. I tapped my fingers on the table. Tap, 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 trying to calm my racing heart. Then, I saw her. She wasn't what I expected. Younger, for one thing. Late 20s, maybe. Dressed in ripped jeans and a faded black t-shirt, with a mess of fiery red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had multiple piercings in her ears and a tattoo snaking around her wrist. She moved with a restless energy, a kind of controlled chaos. She walked straight towards me, her eyes, a startling shade of green, locking onto mine. No hesitation, no doubt. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice slightly husky. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. She sat down opposite me, pulling out a battered laptop that looked like it had seen better days. Stickers covered the lid, a chaotic collage of slogans and symbols. "You don't look like a ghost," she said, her gaze sweeping over me, assessing. "I feel like one," I replied, managing a weak smile. She snorted. "Fair enough." "So," she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, "you're telling me you don't exist? No records, no history, nothing?" "That's what everyone keeps telling me," I confirmed, the familiar wave of frustration and fear washing over me. "The passport office, the bank, my job, even my parents' house. It's like I've been erased." "And you have no idea why?" I shook my head. "None. It's like I woke up one day and I was erased." Lena's perspective. He looked genuinely lost, this Ethan. Not like a con artist, not like a crazy person, just lost and scared. But there was something else in his eyes, too. A flicker of steel, a hint of determination. Good, he'd need it. I was skeptical, of course. I'd dealt with my share of nut jobs and time wasters. But the message he'd posted, the code he'd used, that was the real deal. And the mention of Project Chimera, that had hooked me. "All right, Ghost," I said, tapping a few keys on my laptop. "Let's see if we can find you." I launched a few programs, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I needed to test him, to see if he was who he claimed to be. "What was your mother's maiden name?" I asked, not looking up. "Anderson," he replied instantly. "Favorite color?" "Blue." "First pet?" "A golden retriever named Max." He answered without hesitation, his voice steady. His recall was impressive. Almost too impressive. It was like he had a photographic memory. Interesting. Ethan's perspective. I showed her the photo, and she took it carefully and looked at it for a while. "I'll run a facial recognition, see if I can get a match." She took a picture and started working on her computer. "I will help you, okay? But there are risks. Serious ones." I nodded. I understood. "Good, there are rules too. I am calling the shots. Are we clear?" I nodded again. "Good, Ghost. Let's find you." I watched her work. A strange mix of hope and apprehension churning in my gut. I was putting my life, my very existence, in the hands of this complete stranger. A woman who talked to her computer, drank copious amounts of energy drinks, and looks like she belonged in a punk band, but she was my only hope. Lena's perspective. My apartment was my sanctuary, my command center, my escape. It was a chaotic mess, a reflection of my mind, but it was organized chaos. I knew where everything was, every wire, every circuit board, every empty can of hyper-fuel energy drink. "All right, Behemoth," I muttered to my computer, patting its battered case. "Let's dig up some dirt." Ethan sat on a beanbag chair in the corner, watching me work. He looked overwhelmed, lost, and utterly out of his depth. He also looked exhausted. I made a mental note to get him some food later. I started with the basics, running his name, his date of birth, his social security number, the one he claimed was his, through every database I could access. Nothing. He was right. He was a digital ghost. "Damn," I muttered, cracking my knuckles. "They did a thorough job." I moved on to more unconventional methods. I slipped through firewalls, bypassed security protocols, delved into the dark corners of the internet where secrets were hidden, and information was currency. I was good at this, damn good. I could find anything, anyone. But Ethan, he was a challenge. It was as if he'd been deliberately, meticulously erased. Every digital footprint, every online record, every trace of his existence. Gone. "This is impressive," I admitted grudgingly. "Whoever did this, they knew what they were doing." "So you're saying that there is nothing?" he asked. His voice held no hope. "Not nothing, just not easy," I corrected. "I need more coffee." I opened a drawer to realize I was out. Damn, looks like I will have to stick with water. Hours passed. The only sounds in the room were the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the vintage keyboard. I refused to use those flimsy modern things, the whirring of Behemoth's fans, and the occasional curse from me when I hit a dead end. Ethan watched me, his expression a mixture of awe and anxiety. He was completely reliant on me, and the weight of that responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. He shifted uncomfortably, and then looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking the silence. "Shoot." "Why are you helping me?" I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was a fair question. "Let's just say, I like a challenge," I replied, a half-truth. "And I don't like being told something's impossible." There was more to it than that, of course. The mention of Project Chimera had triggered something within me, a long-buried memory, a ghost of my own. But I wasn't ready to share that with him. Not yet. Suddenly, Behemoth beeped, a triumphant sound. I'd found something, a single fragmented file, buried deep within a government database, heavily encrypted. "Bingo," I muttered, a grin spreading across my face. The file name was a string of random characters, followed by EC, Ethan Cross. A memory flashed through Ethan's mind. A girl, laughing, her hair the color of a sunset. They were sitting by a lake, sharing a picnic. He couldn't quite grasp the details, but the feeling was intense. A sense of pure, unadulterated happiness. His first love. A love that was now just a ghost, like him. "I've got something," I said, my voice filled with excitement. "Heavily encrypted, but it's definitely you." I started working on decrypting the file, my fingers flying over the keyboard, my mind racing. It was a complex cipher, but I was better. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the file began to decrypt, revealing its contents, slowly, tantalizingly. The first few lines were garbled, still encrypted, but then a few words emerged, clear and chilling. Project Chimera. Subject 42, Dr. Adrian Langley. Memory Erasure Protocol. My breath caught in my throat. Project Chimera. It wasn't just a name from my past. It was real. And Ethan was a part of it. He found what he was looking for. Agent Solomon Reed was a man of routine and precision. His life was a meticulously ordered sequence of tasks, executed with unwavering efficiency. He was the best at what he did, tracking down and neutralizing threats, and Ethan Cross was currently his primary threat. The Situation Room hummed with activity. Monitors displayed maps, surveillance feeds, and data streams. Analysts pored over information, searching for any trace of the fugitive. Reed stood at the center of it all, a calm island in the storm, his hands clasped behind his back. "Report," he said, his voice crisp and authoritative. "No sightings, sir," an analyst replied. "He's vanished. Facial recognition software has turned up nothing. No credit card activity, no phone calls." Reed nodded, unsurprised. Cross was proving to be more resourceful than they'd anticipated. He'd slipped through their net, disappearing into the urban sprawl. It was frustrating, but also intriguing. He walked over to a monitor, displaying a still image from the security footage at Cross's apartment, the moment before Cross had escaped. He zoomed in on Cross's face. Desperate, yes, but also determined. Not the face of a hardened criminal, the face of a man fighting for his life. Reed pulled out his pocket watch, a habit he'd developed years ago. It was an antique, a family heirloom, though he never actually looked at the time. The smooth, cool metal was a comforting weight in his hand, a tangible connection to something. He couldn't quite place it. He flipped it open, then snapped it shut. He returned to his office, a sterile, minimalist space that reflected his personality. He sat down at his desk and pulled up Cross's file again, or rather, the lack of a file. A single, blurry photograph, a few lines of text stating no record found. It was a void, an anomaly. And anomalies bothered Reed. He had been having nightmares lately, not vivid nightmares, with clear images or narratives, just flashes of darkness, a sense of pressure, a feeling of being trapped. He never remembered them upon waking, just a lingering unease, a knot in his stomach. He dismissed them as stress, the byproduct of a demanding job, but they were becoming more frequent. He picked up the phone and called his superior, Director Thorne. "Thorne," a gruff voice answered. "Sir, I have some concerns about the Cross case," Reed said, keeping his tone neutral. "Concerns?" Thorne's voice was laced with impatience. "Reed, you're wasting time. Cross is a security risk. Find him." "Sir, there's no evidence that he's a risk. In fact, there's no evidence of anything. His entire history has been erased. That's not standard procedure." There was a pause. "We've been over this, Reed. Cross is a ghost. A glitch in the system. He needs to be eliminated." "But what if he's not a glitch, sir? What if he's—" Reed hesitated, unsure of how to articulate his growing suspicion. What if he's a victim? Thorne's voice hardened. Don't go soft on me, Reed. Your job is to follow orders, not to ask questions. Find Cross. That's an order. The line went dead. Reed slowly hung up the phone, his unease deepening. He was a soldier, trained to obey, to follow the chain of command. But something about this case felt wrong. Fundamentally wrong. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small, locked box. Inside, he kept files on cases that bothered him. Cases that didn't quite add up. Cases that had been closed too quickly, too neatly. He added Cross's file, the single, blurry photograph, to the box. Then he started digging. He searched for Project Chimera, the name Lena had found in the fragmented file. He used his personal credentials, bypassing the official channels, going off the books. The results were predictable. Redacted files, access denied, dead ends. But Reed was persistent. He knew how to find things, how to uncover secrets. He just needed time. As he delved deeper, a chilling realization began to dawn on him. He was being lied to. The official narrative about Ethan Cross was a fabrication, and he, Agent Solomon Reed, was being used as a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He felt it again. A vague memory. Him and Ethan, together. He couldn't shake the feeling they had met. He decided to find out what had happened 12 years ago. Ethan's perspective. Lena's apartment was a sensory overload. The flickering screens, the tangled wires, the scent of stale coffee and energy drinks. It was a far cry from the sterile, empty spaces I'd become accustomed to in my erased life. But it was also alive. Lena had managed to recover more fragments from the encrypted file. They were displayed on one of her monitors, a jumble of text and code interspersed with occasional disturbing images. This is intense, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. Tell me about it, Lena muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Project Chimera. It's some seriously messed up stuff. As I stared at the screen, a particular phrase caught my eye. Memory reprogramming protocol. Suddenly, a jolt, like an electric shock, surged through my brain. A flash of images, vivid and terrifying, flooded my mind. A sterile white room. Straps holding me down. A blinding light. A masked figure looming over me. A doctor, his eyes cold and emotionless. The smell of antiseptic. The hum of machinery. A burning sensation in my head, a searing pain that ripped through my consciousness. Screaming. My own screaming echoing in the empty room. I gasped, stumbling backward, clutching my head. The room spun, the images swirling in my mind, overwhelming me. Ethan, what's wrong? Lena rushed to my side, her expression filled with alarm. I remember, I stammered, my voice shaking. The lab, the doctor, the fire. I tried to describe the images, the sensations, the sheer terror of the memory, but the words wouldn't come. It was too much, too overwhelming. Easy, Ghost, Lena said, her voice soothing. Just breathe. You're safe here. She helped me to the beanbag chair, her hand on my arm, a grounding presence. It was an experiment, I managed to say, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They were messing with my mind, erasing, changing, I don't know. Lena listened patiently, her green eyes filled with concern. She didn't dismiss me, didn't tell me I was crazy. She just listened. The memory, though fragmented, had triggered something else. A deep-seated fear. Claustrophobia. I hated enclosed spaces. I always had, but I'd never known why. Now I did. I can't stay here, I said, my voice rising in panic. I need air. Lena nodded, understanding. Okay, let's go. We can take the laptop. There's a park nearby. Fresh air, open space, it'll be better. She quickly packed up her laptop and a few essential cables, her movements swift and efficient. She was used to being on the move, to adapting to changing circumstances. As we left the apartment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The open air, the sounds of the city, the feeling of space. It was a balm to my frayed nerves. The memory was still there, a raw and terrifying presence in my mind, but it was no longer overwhelming. I had a glimpse, a fragment of the truth, and I knew with a growing certainty that I had to uncover the rest, even if it killed me. I owed it to myself. The city became our hunting ground. The fragmented file, Lena's skill, and my fractured memories were our only guides. Dr. Adrian Langley. The name echoed in my mind, a ghost from a past I was desperately trying to reclaim. Lena, fueled by endless energy drinks and a burning curiosity, traced the breadcrumbs Langley had left behind. The decrypted file contained references to various research facilities, shell corporations, and obscure academic publications. Each clue led us to another, a twisted path through the city's underbelly. Our first stop was a defunct biomedical research lab on the outskirts of town. The building was boarded up, condemned, a skeletal reminder of past ambitions. We slipped inside, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. "This place gives me the creeps," Lena muttered, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As we explored the abandoned lab, I felt a growing unease, a sense of familiarity, tinged with dread, a flash of memory, a cold metal table, bright lights, a masked face leaning over me. I stumbled, clutching my head, the images overwhelming. "Ethan, you okay?" Lena asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Yeah," I lied, forcing myself to breathe. "Just a headache." We found nothing concrete, just empty rooms and rusted equipment. But the experience had shaken me, confirming that my memories, however fragmented, were real. Our next lead took us to a university library, where Lena, using her hacking skills, accessed archived academic journals. We discovered several papers authored by Dr. Langley, all dealing with experimental neuroscience, memory manipulation, and cognitive control. The language was dense and technical, but the implications were chilling. "Project Chimera," Lena said, pointing to a heavily redacted document she'd managed to unearth. It was all about controlling the human mind, erasing memories, implanting new ones, creating programmable subjects. Another memory flash. This time a voice, cold and clinical, speaking to me. "Subject 42, cooperate. Do not resist." I shuddered, the voice echoing in my mind. We encountered obstacles at every turn, files that were deleted just as Lena accessed them, security systems that were inexplicably heightened, anonymous phone calls warning us to stop. Someone was watching us, trying to cover Langley's tracks. "They know we're looking," Lena said, her eyes narrowed. "They're trying to shut us down." "Who are they?" I asked, frustration and fear mixing in my voice. Lena shrugged. "Government agencies, corporations, secret societies. Take your pick. Langley was playing in dangerous territory. He made enemies." We learned that Langley had officially disappeared a decade ago, after Project Chimera was shut down due to ethical concerns. But rumors persisted. Whispers in the dark corners of the internet. Conspiracy theories about Langley continuing his work in secret, funded by shadowy organizations. One evening, while digging through an online archive of old news articles, Lena found something. A small, cryptic obituary for a research assistant who had worked with Langley. The obituary contained a coded message, hidden within the seemingly innocuous text. "Bingo," Lena said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Langley loved his codes. She deciphered the message. It was a set of coordinates, GPS coordinates, a location, remote and isolated. "This is it," I said, my heart pounding. "This is where he is. This is where the truth was hidden, and I was ready to face it, whatever it may be." The coordinates led us to a desolate stretch of land outside the city, a landscape of scrub brush and rocky hills. The air was still and silent, heavy with a sense of foreboding. There was nothing here, or so it seemed. Lena, using a handheld GPS device, pinpointed the exact location. It was a seemingly unremarkable patch of dirt and rock. "There's nothing here," I said, my voice filled with disappointment. "Think again," Lena said, a smirk playing on her lips. She knelt down, brushing away the loose dirt, revealing a metal plate, almost completely concealed. It had a keypad embedded in it. "Langley was always a fan of the classics," she muttered, pulling out a small device from her backpack. She began working on the keypad, her fingers moving with lightning speed. After a few tense minutes, a click echoed through the silence. The metal plate slid open, revealing a dark, descending staircase. A hidden entrance. We exchanged a look, a mixture of apprehension and determination in our eyes. This was it. We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The staircase led to a long, dimly lit corridor, ending in a heavy steel door. We entered Dr. Langley's secret lab. The lab was a time capsule, a relic from a bygone era. Banks of outdated computers lined the walls, their screens dark and dusty. Strange, unsettling equipment sat gathering dust, its purpose unclear. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals and decay. It was a creepy, unsettling place, filled with the ghosts of past experiments. As I stepped further into the lab, the memories flooded back, overwhelming me. This place. I knew this place. The cold metal table. The straps holding me down. The blinding light. The doctor's face, looming over me, his eyes devoid of any emotion, the needle piercing my skin, the burning sensation spreading through my body, erasing, rewriting, destroying. I staggered, clutching my head, my legs threatening to give way. Lena grabbed my arm, steadying me. "Ethan, what is it?" she asked, her voice filled with alarm. I remember," I gasped. "This is where it happened. This is where they changed me." We found Langley's journals in a locked cabinet, their pages filled with his meticulous notes, written in a complex, almost impenetrable code. Lena, thankfully, was up to the challenge. She set to work, her fingers flying over her laptop keyboard, determined to unlock the secrets they held. Suddenly, a noise. Footsteps, approaching fast. "They're here," Lena whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Agent Reed's voice echoed through the lab. "Ethan Cross! We know you're in here! Come out now!" Reed and his team burst into the lab, weapons drawn. They were closing in, surrounding us. Reed's eyes met mine. He looked conflicted, unsure, his usual confidence replaced by a flicker of doubt. But his orders were clear. He had to capture me. "It's over, Cross," Reed said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Come with us." I stood my ground, my back against the wall, Lena beside me, cornered, but also closer than ever to the truth. The truth about Project Chimera, about Dr. Langley, about who I was. And I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The lab was a tableau of tension. Agent Reed, his face a mask of conflicted duty, stood between us and his team, their weapons trained on us. The red dots of laser sights danced on my chest, a chilling reminder of the stakes. "It's over, Cross," Reed repeated, his voice resonating in the confined space. "Come with us. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Lena, beside me, was frantically typing on her laptop, her fingers a blur. Almost. Got it, she muttered under her breath. I'm not who you think I am, I said, my voice rising above the hum of the machinery. They erased me, they manipulated my memories. I was part of an experiment, Project Chimera. Langley, he knows the truth. Reed's expression flickered, a brief crack in his professional facade. Langley's dead, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, the lab's lights flickered, then died, plunging us into near darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie red glow over the scene. Lena had done it. She'd hacked into the lab's security system, creating a diversion. Go! Lena yelled, shoving me towards a narrow corridor I hadn't noticed before. I hesitated, looking back at Reed. He was momentarily disoriented, his team fumbling in the darkness. Go, Ethan, Reed yelled, but not at his team, he was shouting at me. I took the opening, I ran, following Lena's lead, the corridor twisting and turning, a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten technology. A frail voice echoed down. Subject 42, this way? We stopped, our hearts pounding. From the shadows emerged a figure, frail and elderly, leaning heavily on a cane. Dr. Adrian Langley. He was alive. You remember me? I asked, my voice a mixture of hope and disbelief. Langley nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. I've been waiting for you, Ethan. Or perhaps I should say, Subject 42. He gestured for us to follow him, leading us deeper into the lab to a small, cluttered office. The walls were covered with notes, diagrams, and equations, all written in Langley's intricate code. Project Chimera, Langley began, his voice raspy but firm, was about control. They wanted to create the perfect soldier, the perfect agent, a mind that could be programmed, manipulated, controlled. But I had a different vision. He explained that he'd secretly designed the experiment to achieve the opposite, to create a mind that couldn't be controlled, a mind that would retain its own identity, its own free will, no matter what. You, Ethan, Langley said, looking directly at me, are the only successful result. Your mind is unique. It can resist manipulation. It can see through the lies. It can access information that others cannot. He explained that my memory had been erased to protect me, to keep me hidden from those who funded Project Chimera, those who wanted to exploit my abilities. But he'd also implanted something within my subconscious, a key, a piece of information that could expose their entire operation. The number 42, Langley said, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. It's not just a random number, Ethan, it's a key. A cryptographic key. It unlocks a hidden file, a file containing everything. The names, the dates, the locations, the evidence. Everything you need to bring them down. He explained it was hidden, not in plain sight, but where I would never look. Bring who down? Asked Lena. Langley responded, looking at Reed. All of them. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted from the corridor. Reed's former team was closing in. Reed stepped forward, his expression resolute. I believe you, he said, his voice firm. I've seen enough. I'm done following orders. He turned to face the corridor, his weapon raised. He was switching sides. A flashback, sharp and vivid, pierced through my mind. The accident. It hadn't been an accident at all. I'd been driving, yes, but the brakes had failed. Sabotage. And the men who had pulled me from the wreckage, they weren't paramedics. They were Langley's people. They had taken me, erased me, and started the experiment. We have to go, Lena said, pulling me towards a hidden door behind Langley's desk. Now! The three of us, May, Lena, and the unlikely ally, Agent Reed, fled through the secret passage, the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoing behind us. We were running, not just for our lives, but for the truth. A truth that could shatter a vast and powerful conspiracy, a truth that had been hidden within my mind, waiting to be unlocked. The chase was on, and this time I was ready to fight back. We found refuge in a remote cabin, nestled deep in the mountains, far from the reach of those who hunted us. Weeks had passed since the escape from Langley's lab. Weeks spent piecing together the puzzle, deciphering Langley's notes, preparing for the battle ahead. Lena, with her hacking skills, had finally cracked the code, using the number 42 combined with details from my fragmented memories to unlock the hidden file. It was a treasure trove of incriminating information, a detailed record of a vast conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and industry. A network of power and control built on lies, manipulation, and human experimentation. "We have them," Lena said, her voice filled with a mixture of triumph and apprehension. "We have everything we need to expose them." Reed, his face grim, nodded. "But it's dangerous, Ethan. They'll come after us. They'll stop at nothing to protect themselves." We sat around a small wooden table, the weight of our decision pressing down on us. The choice was mine. "We have to fight," Lena said, her eyes blazing with conviction. "We have to expose them. We can't let them get away with this." Reed was more cautious. "It's too dangerous," he argued. "They're too powerful. We'll never win. We should disappear, go into hiding, protect ourselves." I looked at them both. My friends, my unlikely allies. I thought about my past, about the life that had been stolen from me, about the countless others who had been victims of this conspiracy. "I can't keep running," I said, my voice firm. "I can't keep hiding. I have to do something." I made my decision. I chose to fight, to expose the truth no matter the cost. We huddled around Lena's laptop, preparing to release the information to the world. A single click, a single act of defiance that could bring down a vast and powerful empire. It was a terrifying prospect, but also exhilarating.